Thank you very much. This is part of the China³ series. And for those of you who are joining us right now, you might want to ask, China³, what does it mean? So when you think about fine china, you think about porcelain. When you think about nationhood, you think about China as the country, the nation. And the secret behind the third China, the China³ China, is a little town which is now known as Jingdezhen. But prior to the naming of Jingdezhen, the name was Changnan. And Changnan, if you say it quickly, Changnan, it sounds like China. So we believe at least one version of the word China came from the little township of Changnan, which is today's Jingdezhen. So let's see if we can talk and continue to talk about China³. Next slide, please. So we were already talking about Jingdezhen, the porcelain, and the beauty, and the creation. We are now going to concentrate on a few people today. These people have helped to bring the beauty of porcelain or fine china from China through the Maritime Silk Road all the way to Africa, to Southeast Asia, to India, and eventually to Europe. This person's name is Zheng He. Zheng He is also known as Ma Sanbao. Ma happened to be his surname, and Ma is actually the short for Mohammed. So Zheng He completed 7 voyages to Southeast Asia, the Indian continent, Western Asia, and East Africa from 1405 to 1433. He actually died on that journey. He was the ambassador. He was the diplomat. He was the ambassador of commerce. He, under his leadership, he took 250 ships containing mostly porcelain and then lacquer and silk and other precious Chinese goods across the Maritime Silk Road. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about this eunuch. This Muslim eunuch served the Ming dynasty. He grew up as a Muslim with the birth name of Ma He. Zheng He served in the household of Zhu Di, later participating in the prince's military campaigns. Through this experience, he gained the confidence and the trust of Zhu Di, earning the title of Sanbao. San means treasure, San means 3, and Bao means treasure. He was named to the imperial post of Grand Director and later Chief Envoy during all his 7 beautiful voyages. Next, please. And if you take a look at the right side of the slides, you will see where he came from in China and all the way through the South China Sea, across the Malacca Strait, all the way through the Indian Ocean, and all the way to Africa. And as you can see, the current day Africa, Kenya. If you look on top of the map, you will see the different voyages, the different times. Boy, oh boy, he traveled through these waters and he established absolute strong trade partners, including Java, Sumatra, Malacca, especially known as the Spices Island, Cochin in India, and Calicut. And the Chinese emperor assigned Zheng to employ 63 large ships with crew of over 27,000 men. And actually along the way, he left some of the men on shore, such as Malacca, Penang, and so on, so forth. Next page. So this is an example of the city of Malacca, the people of Malacca in Malaysia, a very absolute impressive museum in honor of Zheng He, and it's called the Zheng He Cultural Museum in the city of Malacca. And as you can see, this is the front. What do you think is inside the museum? Let's go to the next page and take a look. Next, please. So inside the museum, you will see the models of Zheng He's fleet. As you can see, many, many ships and many, many men. And in the center, the Baochuan, the large ship. On the right side of the slide, you can see actually a map showing where he went, how he did it, and all the different places that the ships went through. It was a mix. Every single voyage was a magnificent voyage. And one of the gifts that he gave along the way was porcelain, fine china. Next page. Just to give you a little sense of the magnificent Baochuan, you will see on the right side this beautiful Baochuan. And on the left side, we see the little ship. The little ship is the Santa Maria. So you can see how different they are in terms of sizes. And so to think about China as a country with maritime power, it is absolutely true. And from China, the shipbuilding was so important. In our past lectures, we did talk about this. But what is the secret behind this beautiful ship making is actually the discovery of lacquer. The lacquer was used to paint over these huge ships. And if you ever have time to go to Malacca, you will see these models. But if you have more time, you go to the city of Quanzhou, where these maritime ships came out, and lacquer was found there, and lacquer was used there. And there is a maritime museum in the city of Quanzhou. When you go there, you will be amazed at what you can find. Not only the ships, but the histories of all the voyages. Next, please. So besides what we talked about earlier, the Silk Road that was named by a German individual from China all the way to Persia and so on, through the Gobi Desert and so on and so forth. The actual maritime Silk Road, the Silk Road itself, the maritime Silk Road, did a lot more. It went all the way to current-day Somalia. It went to Egypt, and of course, through the land, and then over to Europe, to the Mediterranean Sea, through the island nation of Malta, all the way to Italy, to Venice, and so on and so forth. So if you are interested, this would be a fascinating piece of history that you can research. Next, please. A little briefing for China porcelain to whet your taste.
What had begun in the 16th and 17th centuries as the importation of occasional pieces of blue and white porcelain for princes and their palaces became, in the 18th century, the maladie de porcelain, the porcelain sickness, when every self-respecting merchant and his household filled every nook and cranny, every shelf with Chinese porcelain.
Today, we tend to eat off plain white plates, but generations of British homemakers have jollied up their interiors with blue and white china. The idea that utilitarian objects could also be works of art was revolutionary and would be a profound influence on our aesthetics. To many, however, this was just an opportunity for conspicuous consumption.
One of the best descriptions of China mania comes from Daniel Defoe. And he's writing in the early 18th century. He says that you need to put it on your tables, you need to put it on your writing table, it's on your cabinets, it's right up to the top of the ceiling. It's being displayed on these shelves in people's houses. And people are so mad for it that they're getting into debt. They're going bust. They're wasting their family's wealth. The world had gone mad for China.
So how did this rare product, available only to the few, become a craze amongst the emerging middle class? It was thanks to the business savvy of the most powerful corporation the world has ever seen, the East India Company.
The East India Company, I think we can look at as being the mother of the modern corporation. It existed in the import-export business, exporting bullion to Asia to bring in luxury goods, spices, textiles, and tea and porcelain from China.
From Leadenhall Street in the City of London, the company controlled the supply and fed the demand for porcelain because they had a monopoly on all British trade with the East. Today, there isn't so much as a brass plaque to mark the place where their mansion offices stood. Another monument to global trade now occupies the plot, Lloyd's of London.
At its height, it had a very grand classical headquarters, perhaps something like the British Museum in terms of its sort of style, sort of with the classical frontage. A very, very big building with its own museum inside, and also its auction house, where every quarter there would be the sale of all the goods, which are supposed to be so sort of now loud and noisy that people could hear them outside, and there'd be that shouting and yelling as people tried to get their price for the goods.
The corporation docks were at Blackwall. They had chandleries, sail lofts, mast houses, careening beds, and an army of stevedores toting bales of cotton, silks, spices, tea, and of course, porcelain by the hundredweight. It was from here that the company ships known as East Indiamen sailed out to find the trade winds. These breezes are a meteorological conveyor belt. They took the ships down the coast of Africa, around the Horn, out across the Indian Ocean, through the Malacca Straits, and into the South China Seas, where hordes of pirates lay in wait.
For the China trade, these were the biggest ships. These were the 1,000, 1,200 ton ships, both having a sort of obviously commercial purpose, but also able to fight off marauders and pirates. There were huge dangers of dying. I mean, about half, two-thirds of people never came back.
For those who made it, the port of entry was Guangzhou, or Canton, and it's where my Chinese journey begins. Today, China is a holiday destination. Then, it was as alien as the moon, except we knew what the moon looked like. Welcome to China. If you'd come here in the 18th century, the scene out there in the dusk would have been one of a flotilla of European ships, all bobbing at anchor, their lights twinkling, occasional sounds of sailors singing. These were the sailors who'd come halfway across the world. In their minds, the celestial empire, as portrayed in blue and white China, a land of romance. And what happened? They got to here, known to the European sailors as the Whampoa anchorage. And this was where they had to stop. The emperor in faraway Beijing was not minded to allow traders to penetrate further than his southern doorstep. They were confined to Canton, and even then only the port area.
There was a view that many of the Europeans and so on were little more than pirates and were to be discouraged because of the disruption they could cause.
There were two very good reasons for keeping the foreigners here in Canton. The first was to prevent the barbarian influence on the Chinese empire. The second, more importantly, was to prevent China's own secrets from leaking out into the West. And one of these secrets, of course, was the method of making porcelain.
Thank you. This gives you a little taste of the mystery. So from the Westerners, their perspective was China was a mystery. And so how could they come into China and figure out many of the things about the Chinese culture, porcelain, etc.? So I'd like to mention one important person whose name is called Li Madou, Matteo Ricci. Now here you see a picture of him wearing a Chinese scholarly robe. And he actually was a Jesuit missionary. He came into Macau. So today, if you go to Macau, the first statue you will see at pretty much the entrance of Macau is the statue of Li Madou. He learned Chinese and he worked as a cultural ambassador. He learned a lot about porcelain as well. He collaborated with a gentleman named Xu Guangqi to translate the Euclid's elements into Chinese. So this would be someone that we should remember. Next one, during the Ming, sorry, go back. Next page, please. So during the Ming Dynasty, as you could see, porcelain began to really become a key part of the global trade. And as you can see, in many of the oil paintings, in many museums all over the world, in Europe and everywhere else, you will find porcelain as part of the painting. And it was regarded highly by the people in Europe. Next page. And Chinese porcelain in global trade in the 17th and 18th century, they were just fantastic. The trade was transoceanic. They linked China, Japan, Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and South and North of America. So in the 17th century and the 18th century, porcelain was part of this major trade. This trade substantially changed Western dining and eating traditions. That is to say, you have fine china, Chinese cups, China cups for high tea, and any type of high level dining and fine dining you cannot do without porcelain. Other items, of course, included textile. Beautiful Chinese silk became the fashion of the Indian court, British courts, French court, Spanish, etc. And then Indian cotton was also very popular. Now, alongside with Japanese lacquer, Chinese lacquer, and then Mexican silver. As you can see, porcelain was ranked very top on the list. Next page. You can see more on the left side, a porcelain bowl or more. On the right side, a beautiful, we call a vase, and it could also be considered a large ginger jar. Next page. So we have seen the little video about the global trade. Now you can see, although you may not be able to see very clearly, the words on the map, they were actually the trade items. If you happen to be in New York, and if you happen to go to the Metropolitan Museum, you will find such a beautiful map curated by the curators of the Metropolitan Museum. Of course, this talked about tea, silk, porcelain, and so on and so forth. Next page. So in the Qing dynasty, I put here 1911. It is very important because after 1911, the Republic of China was established. The founding father, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, founded the Republic of China. And yesterday, November 12th, was his birthday. And many people celebrated his birthday even until today. So the peak of Chinese ceramic production was seen in the reigns of Kangxi, Yongzheng, Qianlong, during which improvement was seen in almost every type of ceramic style, blue and white, polychrome, etc. And this is a beautiful example on the right. Next page. So during the Qing dynasty, and the Ming Dynasty, China exported over 150 million pieces of porcelain to the West. As we just said earlier, the West, they were crazy. However, for hundreds of years, foreigners still had not discovered the production and the material techniques for fabricating porcelain. So people wanted to find out, how could this be done? In order to obtain porcelain, many kings and nobles started their laboratories in search of the secret sauce, the secret recipe. Even Marco Polo used every opportunity to pry into the secret of China's porcelain production, but his understanding remained limited. Next page, please. Now, the French missionary, Francois Xavier d'Anquecourt, his name, Chinese name is Yin Hong Xu, and this gentleman was able to crack the secret because he was invited by Emperor Kangxi. He was one of the first French Jesuit missionary to be allowed into China, to be allowed into Jiangxi province, and actually to be allowed to live in the township of Jingdezhen. Now, what he did was he befriended the people, and he was able to learn and describe in great details the porcelain production, including the clay, the gaze, the firing, and so on. He wrote letters back to Europe. The letter was published, and this immediately shocked the entire Europe. So let's take a look at the next slide. So this is a picture of Yin Hong Xu, and also he learned the Chinese technique, and he wrote about it during the time of the Kangxi period. And let's see if we can find the letter, the sample. Next page. Okay, so this page is actually an image of the letter. We took just a very small piece of the translation. From time to time, I have stayed in Jingdezhen to administer to spiritual necessities of my converts. And so I have interested myself in the manufacture of the beautiful porcelain, which is so highly prized and is sent to all parts of the world. Nothing but my curiosity could ever have prompted me to such researches. But it appears to me that a minute description of all that concerns this kind of work might somehow be useful in Europe. Indeed, it became most useful. Next page. And then in the Qing dynasty, we have someone by the name of Cornelius Pronk. And this person was commissioned by the Dutch East India Company to design many plates. So you probably know of his work, especially later on. We're going to have Hilda talk about Amsterdam. Next page. So you can see in the Qing dynasty, the Pronk made 4 different designs. They look, you can look on the right side and the left side. Next, please. So in the Qing dynasty, you could see such beautiful porcelain, and they were so sought after by the Europeans that they kept getting a variety of underglaze to floral, landscape, and figurative scenes. And these are 2 examples. Next page. And this is a beautiful 粉彩九桃瓶. Fen is pottery. Cai means color. The development of 粉彩 enamel was one of the most significant technical contributions made to ceramics during the Qing dynasty. And you can view this beautiful vase in the Beijing Palace Museum. Next page. Wanted to bring you to J.P. Morgan. Many of you know about this name But besides being a financier, he was also a huge collector of Chinese gemstones, tapestries, furniture, and porcelain. Next page. So J.P. Morgan's collection included many beautiful pieces made in Jingdezhen in Jiangxi province. And also we have another person, Sir Percival David, also was such a huge collector. Next one. So let's look at a person that you all probably know because of his last name, Freer. In Washington, D.C., we have the Smithsonian Museum of Freer Gallery, and the person's name is Charles Lang Freer, a collector of East Asian art, and in particular, porcelain. Next page. And in the Freer Gallery, I'm sure all of you have visited during your visits to Washington, D.C., you will find many pieces of porcelain in there. Next page. So here you can see Freer Gallery of Art, just a sample of what you can see, porcelain, lacquer, beautiful pieces. Next page. You can see this beautiful piece from the Smithsonian Museum. It was a Yuan Dynasty piece made in Jingdezhen, Jiangxi province. Next page. And then from Smithsonian of mid-15th century Ming Dynasty piece made in the famous township of Changnan, also known as Jingdezhen. Next page. And then we have Percival David. This gentleman, of course, a huge collector, and the David Foundation of Chinese Art holds a collection of Chinese ceramics that are on permanent display in a dedicated gallery in room 95 at the British Museum. We'll show you a very short video of room 95. Next page. Next page. Next page. Yes. A quick glance of room 95. This is a room that you must visit when you have a chance to go to London British Museum. Thank you. Next page. I want to bring your attention to a gentleman by the name of Lu Qing, also known as Mr. Lu, the owner of the beautiful Red Mansion in Paris. He worked as a houseboy, actually, for Zhang Jingjiang, the Chinese ambassador to France in 1902. And later on, next page, he, against a lot of people's objection, he actually built this beautiful Chinese style 3-story building in the heart of Paris. And Lu Qingzai began to really bring Chinese arts, porcelain, other pieces, bronze, to Europe and to the United States of America. So as you can see, this is a famous site. When you go to Paris, besides going to the Louvre, I would hope you will drop in and take a look at this beautiful museum. Next page. So Lu Qingzai actually was in existence after the Republic of China, and he acquired and sold so many items, including selling to Charles Lang Freer and to the museums in the West, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the British Museum in London, and the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia. Next page. So let's now take a look at Jingdezhen. This is a sneak preview. No one has seen this commissioned video, commissioned from the Chinese Cultural Center at San Diego State University and also collaborating with Chinese Historical Museum in San Diego.
经过讨价还价，金昆明买下了这件心爱的藏品。这个80后小伙子叫卢毅，他是景德镇瓷器著名制瓷人罗炳生的第5代传人。他上学时是学习修辞专业的，对瓷器的热爱使得他坚守着这份事业。
你现在做的是什么事情？
这个壶子呢，它在我这个收来的时候，它只是剩下一把壶，它这个地方是完全断掉的。这个是我后来把它给修复起来的，用这个修瓷器的胶水，把它给这个后配上去。
这个壶是什么时期的？
这个壶呢是这个文革时期的一把，这个叫做于正清的一个江西的一个做瓷器的一个比较有名的一个制瓷师傅。这个他做的呢是一款叫做布衣暖菜根香，它也是反映当时一个时期一个美好的一个愿景，希望能穿衣服能穿的比较暖和一点，然后吃的东西呢虽然吃的是菜根，但是也吃的很香，所以反映当时一个时期。
江校长，我们现在到了哪里？
以前的宇宙磁场，现在呢叫陶溪川，是政府打造的一个工程，现代化改造，就有点博物馆的味道吧。热风馆，就是窑里面的余热抽出来的。
这是当年的痕迹吧？
对，完全是当年的。这就是隧道窑的烟囱。烟囱呢跟隧道窑是有长公度比例的，隧道窑一般呢在120米长，这个烟囱呢也在大概50-60米的高度吧，它抽力就要足够的大，否则的话火呢就走不到尽头。随着社会历史的变迁，景德镇瓷业一代一代的传承和发展，瓷都景德镇发生了很大的变化，吸引了众多的热爱瓷文化、献身瓷业的年轻人们，被称为景漂。景德镇的瓷业将在他们手中进一步发扬光大。正所谓将从八方来，气承天下走。
我们是从那个农村出来的，
农村哪？
家里的条件也不是那么很好，说真的是吧？就是为了就是来学一门手艺嘛。
一直在漂，但是这一次漂是漂到自己喜欢的，生活、学习、工作都是自己喜欢的东西。
这个小伙子来自台湾，
我们都是做陶瓷的，因为景德镇陶瓷发源地嘛，
台湾，
所以我们一定要来寻根。
到景德镇朝圣来的，
是，一朝圣就爱上这里，就住下来。我祖籍是福建漳州，那我是因为陶瓷，所以又回来大陆寻根，因为陶瓷艺术让我这边碰上我的爱人，然后我现在的扎根在景德镇。感谢中国的瓷器，让我们结缘。
这天，李毛仔的柴窑经过数日的烧制，就要开窑了。每次开窑都像是一次节日。 吉时已到，毛载宣布。
今天很好，丰丰富富90%的邀请你，这是菜肴最难得的。祝贺啊！这是老天爷保护我。
在瓷业发展的历史长河中，景德镇瓷历经不同时期，经久不衰。其中，文革瓷成为重要的历史文化遗产。
Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Bob?
Thank you so much, Lily. This was actually a wonderful presentation, and we're exactly right on time. And we're going to have, I'm sure, a lot of questions. So what's going to happen now, the plan's going to be that I'm going to reintroduce our discussants, and they're going to chat. And then after that, Elizabeth is going to be calling questions from the audience. So if you have questions, either write them in the chat box. Well, that would actually be the best way. Write them in the chat box, and Elizabeth will be looking at them and writing them down and giving it to us later. My first thought is I'd like to speak to Jen, and I'd like to ask her, growing up, her memories of porcelain in her family's life, and what the significance of it was to her. Jen, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chang. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and I have to say, you know, I learned much from that presentation. I was born and raised, you know, in Beijing. You know, from the mid 1970s, I was born in Beijing, and you know, much of it, I guess, I missed. Whether it's, and then I moved to the United States when I was 16 years old. So much of the Chinese history, I guess, you know, I missed, and that was such a wonderful condensed version that taught me so much of the porcelain. And, you know, my parents also, I think it mentioned that I'm a professional cellist, but both of my parents are also professional musicians back in Beijing, China. And both of them performed, actually, one for the China Philharmonic, the other one for the Central Ballet. Both of these organizations were heavily used for propaganda, you know, during the Cultural Revolution. And so my earliest memories of porcelain china in my household was actually a teapot that had a vivid, beautiful picture. The teapot is white. I wish I had it here with me, but it's back in Beijing with my parents. It's a beautiful white teapot with wonderful vivid colors of a pair of ballet dancers, pas de deux, in one of also the most famous traditional themed ballet production called Bai Mao Nu, which is white-haired girl. That to me was, my only, piece of fine china, in my household. But of course, another is, which I have here with me, is this piece of, it's not from, Qing or Ming dynasty per se, but this was from the early, 20th century. This was actually a wedding present for my parents when they got married in the 1960s. So, but, it's beautiful, and, and it reminds me so much of what my friends bring me back from the Netherlands. So I think this probably is a good segue to bring Hilda in, that how much that I remember of the Netherlands by their beautiful little children kissing and their windmill in my childhood memories as well.
Well, thank you very much, Jen. And we're going to be probably calling on you later. But right now, as you mentioned from the segue, Hilda, when I think of Holland, I think of many things. And one of the things I think of is Delft ceramic ware. And I also think of those blue and white square tiles surrounding people's fireplaces. So, so Hilda, would you like to chat about the relationship between China and Holland?
I'd be happy to. Do you want me to show the video, the slideshow, or?
Yes, Muting, I think you have her slides. Why don't we get started? We're going to have your first slide, okay?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes.
And
yes.
Muting will move them along.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. This is so interesting lecture, Lily. Thank you so much. And what I would like to talk about for a very brief time is how incredibly important blue and white porcelain was for the Dutch culture in the 17th century. And I just have a few things that I would like to talk about. And this is next slide, please. This is a poster that was made in recently when there was an exhibition of the East India Company in the Netherlands. But you can see this is the point. There is no Delft without China. And Delft is just a little town, but you can actually think of the 17th century in the Netherlands, how incredibly important the Chinese culture, economics, etc. was. There was before 1602, no one had seen any blue and white china in Holland. And then in 1602, they captured some ships from Portugal and brought in 100,000 pieces of blue and white. And as this other video that Lily already showed, there was a total craziness about blue and white. So in the first 45 years in the Netherlands, 1602, when they captured these ships from Portugal, 3 million pieces of Jindanzhen were imported into the Dutch Republic, and there were only 1 million people there. So there is nothing, the amazing thing, there's nothing written about Dutch porcelain in the 17th century, even though it was extremely popular. It was, I guess, so popular that people didn't think they needed to write about it. But there was only one sentence, and it's repeated over and over again, because this is the only sentence that is written about it, that somebody complained that even it's so used, it's now used in daily use, even common people have it. Next slide, please. Because before, as Lily already showed you this painting, it was only the gods that had this beautiful Chinese porcelain. That means the nobility of Europe, the kings and the queens. Ordinary people would have never seen it. So how do we know what it looked like? Nothing was written about it, but luckily, next slide. There are lots of paintings, and this is, I just took a detail of the wonderful painting that Lily had chosen by a very famous 17th century a still life painter, and in so many still lifes, they include some absolutely stunning piece of Chinese porcelain to show the wealth, and you can see the beautiful imported fruit, but this is really a glorious piece. Next slide, please. What then happened? When 1602, when the first load of porcelain comes in, every year, ships full of this porcelain, hundreds of thousands of these pieces. If you think of that video that Lily showed there, you know, how far it is to bring it to the coast of China. And then it has to go on these ships, and then it comes through Holland. What do people do with it? They put it on little ledges in their living rooms. And as you can see, these people are middle-class people. They show off to their friends all their collection. There are more than 30 pieces of this very beautiful, fine china. Of course, this was not China. This was not porcelain made for Chinese people. They didn't like it. This was made purely for export. Next slide, please. And this export looked like this. They had panels, wide panels, narrow panels, and then in the middle, often some nature scenes. And all of that is, of course, symbolic, because that is what is key. Next slide, please. But since nothing is written about it, we have to look at these paintings, and we have to look especially at this amazing historic moment, 1967, when these divers, these archaeologists, went into the ocean, because there, in 1613, there was a boat that had sunk, and the load was valued at 88,000 guilders. They had diamonds, they had pepper, spices, and curious shells. But in the manifest, it said that there was no porcelain. However, when they actually brought the stuff up, all that was to bring up, all the spices were gone, the silk was gone, the diamonds were gone, but there's lots of porcelain. So there was lots and lots of smuggling going on. But this load is so important because now we know what it looked like, what the Chinese porcelain looked like before 1613. Next slide, please. And so in the museums, you now have these wonderful pieces from this shipwreck. And of course, they are all pieces that are, you know, broken. However, next slide, please. There are some pieces that from that shipwreck that are absolutely perfect. Like this one is perfect. This is a little broken. But thanks to that shipwreck, we now know how accurate these paintings were, because you can see how it's almost as if he was actually painting this bowl, and you can see the bottom here is very similar to that. Next slide, please. Another place where we can see evidence of this fantastic import of porcelain is in cesspits and in canals in Delft, where you can find, and I took this picture just a few days ago when I went to an exhibition in Delft on porcelain, and this is a misfire. Now in 1644, in that period, there was a terrible civil war. No porcelain was exported, nothing came into Holland. So what did the potters do of Delft? They imitated, and this you can see here, this is a broken piece in the canal, just dug up a few years ago, and you can see how precise these potters copied the Wanli porcelain. Next slide, please. So these Delft potters, poor Delft potters, for example, in 1627, there's this ship coming in. It's called the Wapen of Delft, the Weapon of Delft. It brings back almost 10,000, 9440 pieces of porcelain, partially captured from the Portuguese and partially bought. You know, they were doing a lot of pirating. 2 years later, the ship comes back with over 5,000. So 15,000 pieces of porcelain come in to this little town of Delft. And what do these poor Delft potters do? They're now out of business, you think, right? Next slide, please. Well, Vermeer in 1660 paints this wonderful painting. This is what the potters in Delft used to do. They made this dark, reddish clay pottery, but now there is on the wall here some little squares that Bob was talking about. Next slide, please. So this is the history of Delft. This is how they used to make it. Then the Wanli bowls come in and they are overwhelmed, but they are going to compete. Next slide, please. So here you have the Qing Wanli design. And this is the imitation of Delft. And they call it Delft porcelain. They call it Holland's porcelain. It is not porcelain, it's earthenware, but it is very thin. They developed a way to have white and blue, very similar, but so they have to compete. And then in 1640s, when no more porcelain comes in from China, they're actually exporting this also abroad, and they become very, very important porcelain center. Next slide, please. And so what this is one before the Chinese porcelain comes in, the little Madonna with some just some lines. And here you can see how creative they use the Wanli design. Next slide, please. But if you're Catholic, that's fine. But if you're not Catholic, you don't want a Madonna. You want a little town in the middle. And so you can see how these designs in the border are very much inspired, but not copied precisely, but just inspired by these Delft potters. Next slide, please. And now you may have a little town in the middle of your plate, but why not make a little plate, a little square of that town itself? Because the houses were wet, they needed tiles on the walls to keep the water out. So here you have a completely new object, but it's completely based on Chinese pottery, on Chinese porcelain, I meant. Next design, next slide, please. In the Museum of San Diego, we have a fantastic collection of these 17th century, authentic 17th century tiles that are now seen as typically Dutch, but are really based on this incredible love for the Chinese blue and white that came in the 17th century. Next slide, please. So here you see, this is the tradition, this is the new invention, and in between you have the Chinese porcelain coming in, leading to this. Next slide, please. So next time you are flying to the Netherlands, you will see that the stewardesses and all the KLM people are in blue and white. You will get a little plate with some Chinese designed image, and you may even get a napkin with some blue and white, because this Qing porcelain is really helped construct the Dutch identity in the 17th century. Thank you all very much.